Hey everyone, welcome to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have an awesome show for you today. You see, I'm already singing. We're going to be talking about a brand new smart home company. It's Resideo. They just went public this week, so we're talking about that. We're also talking about the death of the smart home hub. We're probably going to get a lot of feedback on this, but we've got
the debatable death.
The debatable death. I like that, Kevin. iRobot is going to share your Roomba data with Google. Yay. We've got some security flaws to talk about, and we're going to talk about the death of beacons. What happened there? Microsoft has a vision for the smart campus. We've talked a little bit about it, but we're going to talk some more about it today. And we have our guest this week is Alexandra Deschamps-Sonsino, who has a brand new book about the smart home that's actually really good. And we're going to talk to her about servant dynamics, women in the smart home, and why we're currently at this weird impasse where nothing works together and we hate everything. So maybe we don't hate everything, but it's still pretty grim.
This is a downer of a show. Death, and hate.
It is a bit of a grim episode, but as always, we will shepherd you through it with care and sensitivity, and I'm sure a few laughs. So we also are going to hear from our sponsor, Bitdefender, brand new sponsor this week. Yay, Bitdefender. And our other sponsor, let's hear from them now. This week's sponsor is Cognizant. With demanding customers at the center of today's value chain, delivering engaging products and experiences is even more important. Cognizant, a global leader in business and IT services, helps companies engage customers by envisioning innovative products and services or inventing disruptive new business models. With these insights, Cognizant collaborates with clients to build smart products, disruptive strategies, and new ways of engaging customers across every channel that use the power of IoT. Learn more about Cognizant's IoT services and solutions at cognizant.com/IoT. Okay, Kevin, I am excited. I am super excited about this news because Resideo is the name of Honeywell's smart home and security spinoff, and it's actually going to be based in Austin, which is where I now live. Yay! It is Honeywell, over a year ago, announced that it was going to spin off some of its businesses to kind of streamline. This is a popular thing that happens every, decade or so. These companies, they get really big and then they're like, we're a conglomerate. And then they shed everything and it goes on and back and forth. It's very fun. So this time, Honeywell is doing the Resideo spinoff. It will be based in Austin and it joins Alarm.com, Control4. Savant is not public, so it's going to become one of the smart home security publicly traded companies out there. And I think this is kind of interesting because it ties to something else you wrote, Kevin, which is about the death of the smart home hub. And I think there's a couple big themes here. Oh, sorry. It's the debatable death.
Yes.
If I look at this, the macro picture is we have set the stage for the smart home in the sense that people are interested in it. They're understanding that they can provide greater security depth, which is why I think a lot of these companies are doing pretty well or thinking they will do pretty well. But I also think it's still way too complex for normal people, which is where we're getting things like the professional services and the ISPs getting into this. And actually a company called Calix, which I used to know decades ago when I covered, fiber and ISPs, those guys actually launched a smart home gateway that will be sold through ISPs and has Amazon's Madam A inside of it. Remember, you guys, Madam A is what we call Amazon's digital assistant, so as not to set off your digital assistants. And this is actually, it's all part of this larger theme where DIY feels almost dead. And let's talk, I was like, I know I said this was about hubs, but it relates. Kevin, you want to kind of talk about the death of the hub? The debatable death of the hub?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. And just to clarify, or to make sure for my own information, the Resideo business, that's more focused on like consumer residential type, whereas Honeywell is still doing like industrial things?
They are. I do think it's weird that they split that off because I thought there's a lot of, God help me, synergies that could be had.
Well, no, actually, I think it's a good idea because of those synergies. I mean, from a technology standpoint, there are obvious synergies there, but yet the implementation standpoint are very different between industrial and consumer. So I think it's a good idea.
Okay, well, there you go. And I'm thinking not industrial, I'm thinking more enterprise. Like, I feel like that's where the health and safety, those kind of things that Honeywell is so good at, both on the residential and enterprise side, I think it'll be sad to have those split, but that's just
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, they just went public, so we'll find out in the future. But getting back to hubs, and I understand I'm probably going to get a lot of negative feedback from the diehard readers that have had hubs for years and years. You know, maybe they had X10 stuff going and Insteon hubs and so on and so forth. And trust me, I didn't like writing this because I don't want to admit defeat, but I am admitting defeat to a point. It seems to me like the hubs of today that we've talked about over the past few years, say your Samsung SmartThings, your Wink, and many others that are out there that people are using. And by people, I mean listeners and readers of the site, not normals. It gets back to the whole DIY that you were talking about a second ago. I think they've been usurped by Apple, Amazon, and Google because those three are focused far less on adding more radios to support things, which we don't want to hear because, I mean, we've got Z-Wave and Zigbee devices, but these guys are focusing mainly on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Instead of focusing on radios, they focused on user interface, moving over to or away from smartphones and into speakers for voice control, as well as smart displays. And they've also reached out to extend their integrations with brands. And I looked at some statistics. I mean, as of last week, Amazon says that the number of Matamé compatible devices has quintupled year to date to more than 20,000 devices from over 3,500 brands. Google is also doing well. They've got the Home Hub that they just introduced earlier this month. Google Assistant works with over 10,000 smart devices from over 1,000 brands. I don't think you can say the same about Samsung or Wink or any of the other hubs that people, that our core audience might be using. So I think I'm illustrating the difference in the approach. And what's going to happen here is, okay, so the automation side of things that are missing from the big three, as I say, the Apples, the Amazons, and Googles, that's going to come. And to be honest, Apple already has that. They've got some automations that you can do with HomeKit. So they're already there. I could easily see Amazon and Google just keep building that base. Apparently, there's been 50 million installed smart speakers from those two companies so far in the US only. And once they keep building it up, then it becomes just a matter of tying it all together in the cloud and maybe pushing down local automations and such. So I kind of feel like the traditional smart home hub is kind of dying away.
I think, and it may not be dying so much as it's just not right for the DIY person. So, and I would be remiss if I did not say that Amazon does have the Echo Plus, which does have a Zigbee radio in it.
Correct.
But I would say that it is complicated. And I think that ties back to the Residio and the new Calyx box for ISPs, which is if you want crazy home automation, really good detailed stuff, you're going to get that from someone else. You're going to hire that out if you are a normal person. And I think the challenge for those guys will be to establish business models that work for what consumers want today. So the traditional business model, there's two. One is you buy all the gear and you pay someone to put it in, and then you pay them to come back every now and then and tweak it. Or you pay a monthly fee and get all the gear, which seems to be what, the ISPs, the ADTs, the Alarm.coms are doing, which is, they supply all this equipment for a fixed fee. You're going to pay off that equipment with a service contract. And the question is, will people want to do that? And I think it depends on the value you get. And security is still the number one value leader for those guys, not home automation.
Yeah, I'd be curious, just bringing it down to a less expensive product. I'd be curious how many smart home webcam devices and companies actually turn those purchases into subscriptions for cloud storage of photos and such.
I was actually really impressed. So I've talked to a couple of companies to get numbers on their subscription services. And I can't name any of them because they would just be very upset with me for saying this if I named them. But in many of the top companies, the cloud subscriptions are above 50%. In some cases, they're above 80%.
Wow.
Which is actually really...
That's a high attach rate.
Yeah.
Very high.
High subscription rate. And those are $5 to $10, depending on the number of cameras, depending on what you want it to do. And they're also not contracts. That's another thing to think about, right? They make it very easy to sign up for these because you put this device in your house, you get like an email and they're like, yeah, send us your credit card. And you're like, okay. In some cases, you don't even have to do that. If you're on Google, Google has your credit card. You're just like, yeah, let's do it. And then every month, in my case with Google, I get an email saying, hey, by the way, we're going to charge you this month. You're like, okay, cool. But I could stop it.
I do the same with Nest and Canary right now.
Yeah. So it's a very different model than the old world. So I think all of these stories are interrelated in a way that going into 2019, I think based on what we're seeing from Google, Amazon, and Apple, mostly Amazon, to be honest, to make attaching things easier and kind of voice programming easier, I think they're going to win at the DIY stuff. And these formal installs with probably a higher level of security, more sensors, more maybe home automation, those guys are going to do well there, but I do think they'll have to adjust their business models.
Right. On the plus side, something I said earlier this year is probably also wrong now, if this is the future that we're talking about, where I said, hey, smart home hubs are probably going to kill off the integration services such as IFT and Stringify and so on. Well, maybe not. I mean, if the hubs don't get into the houses and people want automation, those services certainly add value.
Well, and we talked about this last week, but I saw GitHub Actions. Remember how we talked about
right?
That wasn't last week. That was a couple weeks ago. I actually think that's kind of like an IFT killer right there.
Mm-hmm.
Woo. So yeah, it's
or at least an alternative.
It is, yes.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm. And Comcast bought Stringify, so they'll be building that into their, again, cloud-based services. So maybe we'll see IFT get snapped up by somebody who wants to make life a little easier to integrate, or maybe, I don't know.
Amazon. You watch.
Oh, that's right. You are a big proponent of that, aren't you?
I don't remember. I wrote something about it, or I just talked to you about it like 100 times already. I can't remember.
Yes. It is.
Yes, to both, probably.
Kevin has been very consistent on this point. He would like Amazon to buy IFT and also Wink.
Well, I'm not saying I would like them to. I'm just saying I could see it happen. I could see why it would make sense.
There you go.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of things that make sense, or rather don't make sense, let's talk about the death of Bluetooth beacons. This is I'm mad that I didn't write this story because I've seen this coming for years, and apparently there was a news peg that got VentureBeat to write about it. So yay, VentureBeat, for paying attention. That news bit was actually Google turning off locations nearby in Android, right?
Yeah, nearby notifications is gone.
And most people will not miss it because I can tell you that the only time I encountered nearby notifications popping up on my phone was at Bluetooth World, and I think once when I visited Google.
If it doesn't happen at Bluetooth World, you know it's dead.
So basically, the problem with beacons is actually very similar to some of the problems the smart home has. So take note. It's Halloween, you guys, when we're recording this. I'm just goofy as all get out.
She does this all the time, though, not just on Halloween.
It's true.
But I digress. Go on.
Standards. There were 2 competing standards. That's always terrible. Plus, battery issues. If you put a beacon somewhere, you would have to find it again later and change the batteries. In some cases, people would actually move your beacons. It was probably more like tricksterism, or sometimes it was just staff like, oh, get this out of here, and they'd put it someplace else. So batteries, things that move, you don't know where they are. These are actually common problems with sensors that are deployed in enterprises and even in the home. I have low battery notices on sensors and I'm like, where did I put that battery?
There's a couple other things too. I mean, beacons were touted as being very inexpensive, and relatively speaking, they are. However, I think almost all the Major League Baseball stadiums put them in. And it's not like they just put in a few beacons. They're everywhere. And when you start going and buying up hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of beacons, that adds up really quickly. So from that perspective, a big location, it's not exactly cheap. And second, the value you get back is really limited by something not in your control. Do the people at your venue have their Bluetooth on? I never have my Bluetooth on unless I want it on.
And not only do they have to have Bluetooth on, in many cases, they actually have to have the app that works with the beacons on, which, bleh.
Yeah, there's no native integration. Well, Google did try that with its nearby locations in Chrome and so on and so forth. So, but even so, that's completely out of their control. If you don't have your Bluetooth on, you've just spent all that money for nothing.
Exactly. So, goodbye.
Wait, but I have a thought.
Okay.
I would still love to see these technologies, whether it's iBeacon or Eddystone, etc. I would still love to see these continue in the home because I think they could work well for presence. Even if I had to wear a silly little Bluetooth tag on my belt or something.
Why would you need that? You have your phone on you at all times, Kevin. We talk about
True, but I don't leave Bluetooth on. I guess I would in that case.
So I think instead of physical beacons, there's a lot of interesting plays here around virtual beacons. So there are companies like Mist that are creating, basically they put access points. And now that we're seeing Bluetooth actually in Wi-Fi hubs, this is possible in other places where you basically can, via software, create quote unquote beacons, place them in a room or place them in where the Wi-Fi knows there's a room, basically. And voila, you have presence detection, you have some of the same functionality. And if there were a standard for this, which would be amazing, then other smart home devices or enterprise devices could use it. In the enterprise, you may actually, in your corporate phone, have something that's running all the time that works when you're inside the campus. So it's less of an issue there. What we'd need there, though, is 1, Bluetooth in access points, possibly that standard, and 3, really good mapping, which
Ooh, good segue.
brings us to our next story. Oh, I'm so hyper and pleased with myself, which is iRobot, the makers behind Roomba, have done a deal with Google where they will mine, well, Google's going to use the mapping data that comes off of certain Roomba vacuums, and then it can establish accurate maps of your home.
In a sense, it can add presence for a Roomba service. So you can say, hey, Google, tell Roomba to clean the family room, and it will know where the family room is because it has the mapping, and Google Assistant can target that particular room. So that adds more value to the Roomba itself.
So I think that is actually, that's a really good point to make, because I think that is the bare minimum you have to do data collection. You have to offer the user some value. And so Google has very smartly said, hey, here's the value. You can say, go do this, and it'll do it. But it also allows Google to understand what's in your home, where it is, and it's a possibility that, hey, that could be either mapped to create those virtual beacons. It could be a way to understand. Kevin, you said presence, but usually I leave when my Roomba's there, so I'm not in the room. All of this is supposed to be opt-in.
And it will not be used by Google's ad service.
Yes. So
that's a big plus for a lot of people, I think.
Yes. And Google is quoted in one of the stories that we read about this as saying this is basically not just a smart home, but a way to create a thoughtful home that requires less information from users. And Kevin and I call this context, and I do think that's actually true. So, yay!
I may have to get a Roomba again.
Yeah,
Vector doesn't clean up the crumbs too well. He's only like 3 inches tall, so it takes a long time to clean up and vacuum.
Oh, he could be like when you're in a fancy restaurant and they come out with the crumb catcher at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You could just outfit a little crumb catcher on him and he could just like run it right.
Yeah, I just got the alpha of the SDK for Vector, so maybe I'll code that up in Python.
There you go. You do need the crumb catcher. So I'll look forward to that video, Kevin. And could you put him in a little tuxedo? Because I think that would be adorable.
Yeah, I could do that. I could.
All right. So that's the Roomba Google News. And speaking of context, Microsoft has a vision for the smart office that they showed off in a video that, I actually saw.
It's worth a watch.
It's worth a watch to see what you can do. I think it's also kind of a UI cluster, in my opinion, but that could just be like the demonstration aspects of it. So in this video, you swipe your employee badge against something in the wall. It knows where you are in the building. It also can answer, it's got Cortana in there, so it's answering your questions about things like, hey, where can I find sushi? And they're like, oh, it's in this cafeteria. Here's some menu items. Oh, hey, I'm here for my meeting. Great. That ties into Outlook, and you can send out like, boom, everybody's in the meeting except you. Where are you? All that seemed cool. Go, Kevin.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is cool. And I've actually been looking at like smart workspaces for a couple of years. When I was back with Google, it was one of the topics I was researching and so on. And what I liked about this, aside from those examples that they show off, they also show how, again, context, right? Information at the right place and time is super important for pretty much anything in the office. For example, they said we can put one of these in the bathroom or near the bathroom. And if there's maybe a water issue, there's a leak or something, you could swipe your badge. It knows where you are. It knows who you are and says, what can I help you with? There's a leak in this bathroom. Please open a trouble ticket. The system would say, okay, got it. Trouble ticket assigned and opened. And I know where the bathroom is. I know what the problem is. And the reason they say that's important is because in a regular office, you'd probably have to go all the way back to your desk to make a phone call to facilities and so on. But you're more than likely going to get stopped by other people on your way back to the desk. You're going to be thinking about work things, and you're not going to remember to actually open the ticket.
That is true. And here's what I'd like to see, just based on that. And this was, again, a video where an anchor was talking to a person about the project. One, swiping your badge before, like to exchange information with the system, felt like not a lot of work, but you may not do that, right? So I felt like for things like notifying you of a water leak, having a screen there would be really helpful that could say, hey, water leak, right? Or conference in progress. And a lot of these screens exist in workplaces today. The other aspect of this that I didn't love was there's still a lot of things you shouldn't do via voice. So like when it started listing the places where I could find sushi, I was like, oh my God, stop talking.
But it also did say for more information, and it pointed you to an internal campus app with a map and the menus and all that.
I would love to see shot to my smartphone.
I agree. I agree.
Open the app to see this. The Echo app already does this. Google does this with Google Assistant. I know that Microsoft does not. There are not a lot of Microsoft phones. Are there still Microsoft phones out there? Maybe a few?
But there's still some out there. There's no new ones, but there are still some out there. I mean, either shoot it over to my phone or have a programmable NFC tag or something that opens the app for me or something.
Yes, because I've already got to swipe something, although I'm swiping not my phone, my badge.
Right.
So many things. One day my badge will become my phone.
My NFC chip will be in my hand.
Or that. But then you have no screen to see this stuff on, Kevin.
That's okay.
Okay. So that's Microsoft Smart Office. I will also say, to me, this was probably super practical, but the coolest Microsoft Smart Office demo I've ever seen is still the one from Build, where you walked into the conference room. It had like Cortana on this magical pyramid sitting on the conference room table that handled the calls. It also had, I think, a camera, and it could recognize who was in the room. And they were using AI that would basically create to-do notes from your meeting, like conversation. So if someone said, okay, I'm going to follow up on that, or I'll check the calendar dates and get back to you, it would actually...
We need that.
We do. We so need that. I was like, oh, magical.
Yeah.
Until it breaks down, and then all office productivity will grind to a halt, just like what happens today when email or Slack is down.
True.
Okay. There's a lot of ahing in this show. Sorry, you guys, if it's annoying. Oh, and speaking of let's talk about security issues, Kevin. Security research say that the Google Home Hub is insecure. Google, unsurprisingly, is saying it's not insecure. What's going on here?
There's a lot of hoo-ha about this over the past few days, and it all comes from the source of a personal blog by Jerry Gamblin. He is a security advocate. He started nosing around once he got a Google Home Hub, and he scanned the network and saw what the hub was doing, and he saw a bunch of open TCP ports. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, he figured out using an undocumented API that with one curl command, he could reboot the Google Home Hub, which puts it right back up in setup mode where you need to go into the Google Home app and set it up again. And I totally understand that that probably should not be allowed, but a lot of folks are like, these are insecure, all kinds of backdoors and people getting information. There's no information that can be gotten from resetting the hub by this method. And the fact is, you'd have to be on the same Wi-Fi network to actually exploit this. So there's an awful lot of parameters here that I don't think make this a huge issue. And that's what Google is unsurprisingly saying, Now, I'm sure they're going to...
If you do reset it, would it, because you're not loading them through, because like resets would be bad for something like a security camera, but those are actually on the device itself. So the drop cam or the Nest Cam. So if you just reset this, basically you're going to lose your like alarm.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I mean, yeah. So if somebody resets, whether they unplug my hub or do this, I mean, yeah, that's going to cause those kind of problems for sure. But again, I'm like, is it really an insecurity kind of thing? From a data standpoint, I don't think so. Should it be allowed and happen? No, it shouldn't. And Google should patch it. But I just saw so many stories this week, and I don't have a Google Home Hub, so I wasn't concerned to begin with. But my point is, I don't think people need to be overly concerned about this.
Yeah, I have a sense. I tell people, I'm like, look, you got to evaluate these for what they really can do and your risk profile. And that's not something apparently most media do yet, which is unfortunate because there are some really scary things out there that we don't talk about. Hey, speaking of scary other things that we may not talk about often let's talk about hijacking connected construction cranes, because that feels like, ooh, that could be big.
Related. I have a related question. Were you just recently in Vegas?
I was.
Did you know that the official city bird is a crane?
Oh, that used to be the joke in Austin. But
oh, I'm sorry. I'm reusing city jokes now.
That's okay.
Anyway. Yeah, so this is a very unique, interesting security issue, and it is a big vulnerability. There's a connected construction crane made by Telecrane that literally, it has a connection so that the operator of the crane has some assistance in terms of how to run this thing and where to move it and so on and so forth. But there's an exploit that has been documented that is an authentication bypass by capture replay. And what happens is it's basically a man-in-the-middle attack, and somebody could theoretically spoof commands to hijack the crane. And that's really bad because that's not just like a simple reboot where nobody gets hurt. That's somebody could like demolish a building for all we know.
See?
So well, all right, not we, but
like you never know. That is an example of something that is unlikely, but the potential harm is huge.
Exactly.
So we should probably be a little bit more worried about that one.
Yeah.
And we are. So are they going to patch it?
They actually have in the latest firmware. Telecrane has it available so construction companies can actually get it and update the crane's firmware.
Yay! So actually, if you're operating a Telecrane, for all four of you out there,
update your firmware.
Update your firmware. Okay, and because I am on this show and Kevin is a kind person, let's talk about chips. Because for all of us who care so much about Edge AI, it's actually not a new chip company. I've written about it very briefly before in the newsletter, but this is a company doing Edge AI, and they're doing it at increasingly low power, which is awesome. It's a company called Sentient, and it has scored $25 million in a Series B round. It is led by Microsoft's, Amazon's, Madam A Fund, Intel Capital, and other investors who are like, yes, please, can we get low power AI at the edge? So what's cool about Sentient, and there's another company doing this style of processing called Mythic, is they are getting their low power by doing the computation in memory as opposed to on the processor. This is a fundamental change in the way computers work, basically. And it's pretty exciting. We'll have to see how this works in the real world, but its power consumption is crazy low. Kevin, do you remember what the power consumption was?
I don't know if they mentioned the power consumption, but they said that it's a 20 tera operations per watt.
Yes, which is ridiculous.
Yes.
So yes, this is a possibly big game-changing kind of piece of technology. As with all chip stories, that's kind of the big set. They're like, oh, we'll change the world with this. But keep an eye on it, because we definitely need this. Okay, now it feels like time. We're actually going to kind of reprise our hub debate in a moment. For our voicemail from the IoT Podcast Hotline, which, by the way, is brought to you by Schlage. With a variety of stylish and secure electronic locks to choose from, smarter homes start with Schlage. You can learn more at schlage.com/IoT. And we have a winner this month for our door lock contest. Let me grab that guy's name. Oh, our winner is Michael, who is actually the person who we're taking the voicemail from this week in a coincidence that has now happened twice. Yay! And we will start the contest anew in November. So if you would like to win a Schlage door lock plus Wi-Fi adapter, and this is a very nice door lock, please leave us a message on the IoT Podcast Hotline, and you will be entered to win. That number is 512-623-7424. And now let's hear from Michael.
Hi, Stacey and Kevin. This is Michael from Rochester, New York. I don't know if what I'm looking for exists, but I'm hoping you can help me. I have a few LifeX smart bulbs in my house, and it only recently dawned on me that a great place to put another bulb would be in the laundry room with a motion sensor by the door. This way my light would turn on as soon as I stepped in. I don't currently have any kind of smart hub, and I'm trying to avoid getting one as the LifeX bulbs work on Wi-Fi. I tried searching for Wi-Fi connected motion sensors, but all I could find were some that are part of a home security kit, and I couldn't tell if they would work with Stringify. Do you know of any Wi-Fi motion sensors that would work with what I'm trying to do? And if not, which smart hub ecosystem would you recommend I get into for this? I'm also wondering if you're aware of any weatherproof motion sensors that I can use with whatever solution I need to go with for my laundry room. I have a couple of the LifeX Plus bulbs in my floodlight above the front door to help with the night vision of my Nest Hello doorbell.
Okay. Oh, Kevin, it is the death of hubs happening right here. So it's unclear from your voicemail, Michael, if you are using HomeKit. So we decided to answer this question in two ways. One, if you're using HomeKit, we have a solution for you. And two, if you're not using HomeKit, we're going to explain why that may be kind of an issue for you and talk you around it. It sounds like you're using Stringify, so that'll be okay.
Right. If you're using HomeKit, What you could do is get a HomeKit motion sensor, say one from Fabaro. You might even want to consider a door window sensor for the laundry room door, because I only say that because we typically close our door so we don't have to hear all that noise. But either one would work, and because those are Bluetooth sensors, you would not need a hub, although you technically would have a hub with HomeKit anyway, or could with an Apple iPad or an Apple TV. Regardless, in the Home app, you could then create an automation to have that work for you.
Okay, and so Eve also makes one of these sensors. I'm going to add a little caveat there. You will want a hub in your home because if you're doing laundry and you don't have your phone with you, it's not going to work. So, well, it depends on how far your laundry room is from your phone, is what I'm thinking here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right, I gotcha.
that is, now I will say MacroView is a great system. I actually have the exact same thing in my laundry room and I love it. Here's where it gets complicated. If you don't use Home, you might find a Wi-Fi sensor, and we did find several, but there's no way necessarily to tell that Wi-Fi motion sensor to turn on your LifeX lights because you don't have that interoperability layer happening, which is what Home would provide. So in that case, you can buy a Wi-Fi sensor. And the bad news is there's none that are great out there.
At least from the reviews that we've seen.
At least from the reviews. iHome makes one. There's a couple no-name brands that make one. So what you're going to look for, D-Link actually has one that works with IFT. You're going to look for something that works with IFT or Stringify, is a Wi-Fi based sensor, and then you'll use IFT or Stringify to set up the when this detects motion, turn on lights. And then you're also going to want to have a toggle that says after a certain number of minutes, turn off the lights if no motion's detected. So keep that in mind. I'm going to tell you that Hue makes everything you need to do this. It is a little bit expensive, but that's what I'm using in my laundry room and in my master bedroom closet. I use plain white Hue light bulbs and I use a Hue motion sensor, and I've set that up inside the Hue app. So that way you're not going full home hub, and the Hue hub talks to Google, Madam A, and HomeKit. So that would be what I would tell you to do. I know it's not ideal, and then you do have a hub. So of all those options, I feel like we've given you the tools you need to find the right motion sensor.
Do you have a preference on hub ecosystem at all, personally?
You know, the Hue ecosystem is really nice. They keep working on it. So, and now if we're talking about like SmartThings or Wink, I prefer Wink.
As do I. Mm-hmm.
Because it's just easier to navigate. So, Michael, I hope this helps you. Feel free to let us know what you decide to go with, because I'm kind of curious. And hopefully this helps anyone else out there. And I will say, I do love that particular interaction. It's very helpful. So that takes us to the end of the news segment for this week. And stay tuned for our guest, Alexandra Deschamps-Sonsino, who is going to be really dropping some serious knowledge about building a smart home design and business opportunities and what has happened in the last 120 years and what we can learn from all of that. So stay tuned for that. And now let's hear a message from our sponsor, Bitdefender. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Bitdefender, and I have Alex Balan, who is Chief Security Researcher at Bitdefender. So this week we're talking about parental control and the Bitdefender box. This is your smart home cybersecurity hub. And as a parent, I wanted to ask you, can technology do anything to help parents' concerns around things like bullying and predators online?
Yes, absolutely. If you think about it, there has been a need for this because most parental control solutions tackle issues for, preteens. And cyberbullying and bullying in general is a teenager problem. Essentially, in Bitdefender Box, we've designed a component for parental control that monitors the online behavior of teenagers. Whenever they encounter anything that can raise a flag, that's when we notify the parent. And we have many, many methods to do that.
Can parents rely exclusively on technology for something like this?
We would recommend against it. Obviously, we're not going to tell parents how to parent. We strongly believe that it's the parent's responsibility to parent, not to rely exclusively on technology. What we're doing is that we're raising flags. For example, whenever the child is in a conversation or the teenager is in a conversation when there's verbal abuse, when somebody discuss something very, very aggressively with the teenager, or when there's an exchange of nude images, that's when we raise another flag, or when somebody asks the teenager for an address. So what we're doing is that we're telling the parent that the event happened without actually telling the parents the content of the event. And with that message, we're actually telling the parents to have a conversation with the teenager. And that's our approach to this.
Okay. How does this protect my child's privacy?
There are situations where, for example, we may see that Billy was involved in an aggressive conversation with Ken, right? And Ken told Billy to harm himself, God forbid, or something similar. So what we're doing is that we're sending the parent a notification saying, look, Billy was involved in an aggressive conversation with Ken. We don't know how bad it was, but what we're suggesting is that you have a conversation with Billy and make sure that everything is okay.
How exactly can technology help with allaying a parent's concerns about bullying?
Technology is that tool that will be able to monitor what's happening with the teenagers, but at the same time, send the notification to the parent. And the developers of technology will have to have a very difficult task of balancing privacy with security. And I think that we've managed to achieve that balance quite well with parental control in Bitdefender Box.
This sounds reassuring. So where can our listeners go to find out more?
Absolutely. They can go to bitdefender.com/box.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Alexandra Deschamps-Sonsino. Alex! She is an industrial designer and the author of a brand new book called Smarter Homes: How Technology Will Change Your Home Life. Hi Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm really well, Stacey. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am excited. We last spoke probably sometime in 2015, and we have actually communicated for years. You are at IoT Watch on Twitter. You designed a connected product for the Internet of Things all the way back in, was that 2013? The Goodnight Lamp?
I actually came up with it in 2005, but we'll ignore that. I made my first batch in 2013, yeah.
So, and this was a great idea. This was basically, when you turned on this lamp, somewhere else in the world, someone who had a corresponding lamp, it would turn on for them. And the idea was just a easy way to communicate kind of, I guess, where you were in your day. I don't know how to describe it, Alex. You should describe it.
Well, I like to think of it as a nice way of sharing presence and availability. For a family member who's in a different time zone, it's a really nice way of saying, now's a good time to call. I'm around right now. And it just opens up that space and that day-to-day routine with your family.
You've been doing this a while. You have practical experience. Feel like we are war-torn individuals in the smart home. So what made you do this book?
I wanted to write a book for the longest time, and I sort of looked at the smart home space because designing the Goodnight Lamp, being an industrial designer by training, working with super large brands as customers through the years as a consultant, I sort of knew a lot about this space, and I thought, oh, well, I'm sure, I can do more research with someone else's book too. And I really couldn't find anything beyond a bunch of hyper-practical and somehow, quite dry books on networking in the home. Most of them were very old and most of them were very, very specific. And I'm a little bit of a design geek as well, coming from industrial design and interaction design. So I thought it would be really interesting to look at how often we've heard about this idea of the home of the future, really. And we call it smart home now. It was the home of the future in the 50s. It was the efficient home at the turn of the last century. But we've always had this sort of obsession with the home space, and I wanted to explore that in the book.
Going back through history, what has changed? Because when I think of smart home now, I think, oh, internet connectivity. And that's probably what most people think. Or actually, if you had asked me probably 6 or 7 years ago, that's what I would have said. And now I feel like I would say, oh, well, it's got to be connected to the internet. But more importantly, it has to have some sort of intuitive help for me. It has to have some sort of AI capabilities. So it's not just remote access to things. But I'm curious what your take on the evolution of the efficient home all the way to the smart home is.
Well, I think that your description is pretty accurate in the sense that I think for both you and I are people working in the technology space, and we probably think of a smart home as being a technologically enabled home, whereas actually for it to become a reality, quote unquote, you've got to get a lot more people to buy something that turns their home from what they have now, which they might not think of as smart, I think they just think of as their home, into a quote unquote smart home. And how you get someone to make that leap of faith really is, I think, the history of every new consumer technology. So we might try to convince people to buy, voice assistant right now or a connected thermostat, but that's because we tried to convince people to buy completely new, brand spanking new homes with loads of things embedded in it. We used to call it domotics in the 90s. And that kind of comes back to a bunch of people who met actually in the US on something called the Smart House Project in 1987. And the point there was to say, oh, it's going to be like a thing you buy. Even IBM got involved and had something called the IBM Director. So you could buy a home and you could buy the retrofitting of your entire home with connectivity, which at the time was absolutely not the web as we know it now, but the idea of kind of early internet, early technologies, and early applications of new technologies for your home to make your home life better, quote unquote. What I found was that actually the definition of what makes a home better is exactly the same definition as 50 years ago, which is not too far away from the definition of 100 years ago. So the story of how we talk about connectivity in the home hasn't changed. And that I was really shocked by.
Okay, yes. And I remember going to an IBM smart home in like 2004, and they had like RFID interactions like in the kitchen counter that would interact with your food bags and your medicine. And it was crazy out there and kind of neat. But I was like, how do we get this integrated into the home? Which brings me to something you've written about in your book, which is the way that this sort of stuff creeps in is not the way the tech world tends to work. It creeps in individually, not as an entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something kind of quite fun and interesting about how technology giants tend to look at the home space as if it was a comprehensive system. Like, it's a little bit like IoT. If you look at an image in Google of the Internet of Things, it's always this mathematically comprehensible system of things that connect to other things. And somehow there's a trickle down effect between the use of one thing to then trigger other things, because that systems diagram is so appealing mathematically and computationally. And that's how we built, I guess, the web. But it's really not how we build homemaking and how we operate and think about our homes. Most of us want to turn the key in the morning to leave for work and not think about the house forevermore. But somehow we are, meant to be buying products that will make us think about the home all the time, notifications all the time about the home space, which we were kind of hoping we'd just leave behind and get on with our day and go see our friends or go out or whatever it is. But now we have this kind of needy child that's part of a larger system that includes our location and includes our budget, it includes our energy use. And you have this weird systems effect that's being created for us that I don't think is really that appealing. I think it's also a weird thing to want to get people to do, which is to just change their lifestyle from one day to the next. Because technology and new products change our lifestyle, even when it's just to, buy a spiralizer to, eat your vegetables in the shape of spaghetti. It's a lifestyle change.
Zoodles.
Yeah, there we go.
For those of you guys who are not into this, zoodles are zucchini noodles made with the spiralizer. Yes.
So I think every purchase is a leap of faith, and to think that an average normal household who have, so many other fish to fry, they've got jobs to keep, they've got families, health to kind of tend to, that they suddenly want a whole bunch of complex, interdependent interactions with their home, I think is really strange.
That actually is true. And I feel like a couple weeks ago, there were a couple articles out that talked about this kind of backlash and this idea that the home was making people neurotic. So somebody wrote about their connected doorbell and they were like, every now and then I get these notifications and they say something happened outside my home and I go check and I'm freaked out. And then I'm like, oh, that was nothing. And eventually this person took it out because they were like, I don't want these notifications. So that's a very astute point. So where can technology actually help improve our lives in our home and still work within our existing, systems or what we think we want the home to do?
Well, I think that there are key and core, marketplaces for smart home technologies. And the people who've tried new technologies the most around me, and this is anecdotal, but it's always been new parents who are sort of completely, taken aback by the task at hand, the new task at hand of raising a small child. And suddenly any time that you can shave off of even switching the lights on is a welcome intrusion in a sense. And so I do think that for some people, these applications are useful. It's just that they're not useful at a scale that I think most large companies would be happy with, because apart from home computers, mobile phones, and large appliances, we share almost nothing of our home life. We don't have the same furniture. We don't have the same decorations. We don't share the same comings and goings. And so we can't buy en masse the same things. Yes, we'll probably all buy, the usual toilet paper and instant coffee or something, but that's actually rare. And so I think that there's going to be very niche uses for specific products to make our lives easier to a degree. But I also think that we probably have gone past the point where we do want to make our lives at home easier. I think we want our lives outside of home to be easier, especially women, especially in 2018. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic there for companies to think about that, to think about what women's lives are like now, because women tend to be the audience for smart home devices, and what their needs might be, because actually remote access might be something they really want, but, not necessarily for the doorbell. It might be for something else entirely. So thinking laterally and thinking outside of the home box, as it were, I think is really the next job for large companies.
Oh, see, and I'm thinking about, hey, I would love for it to be easier to buy my toilet paper. And that's where things like, Amazon has the dash buttons. There's some interesting fulfillment things out there, ideas that have been tried. Target tried a program called Fetch, where you had like connected soap dispensers and I think a connected toilet paper roll, actually. And the idea was you would put this in your home, you would connect it to the internet, and when it became low, you could set it to automatically reorder things. But people didn't trust it. Fetch didn't even make all of its money that it wanted to on like a Kickstarter.
I think there's also something funny about treating the home, and this is something that comes back to an early 1900s sort of era, which is treating the home like it's a factory floor, like things have to be fulfilled, like you are, buying new materials to make a jet engine or a car. That's not the relationship that people have with something even as stupid as toilet paper or soap. You make different decisions on soap. I know I do continuously. I'm always kind of trying new brands, and actually for brands, this is really important for them to be competitive and not become this sort of staple to the point that people just completely stop thinking outside of what they have to offer. It's been the case for British banks, for example. As everyone moves to digital banking, people don't necessarily know about any other bank. And so they keep the physical stores and the physical bank tellers. They have to have a retail presence in order for people to know that there are other banks. And so I think in the home, we always want to know, well, what is the newest soap I could be buying because it's, sulfate free, paraben free, whatever. What are the better decisions I could be making for my family? And I want to keep those options open. I am not running an industrial facility. I'm running a home.
I like that. Okay, so running a home, what are the things then? Where are the opportunities for companies to come in and make a difference? You talked about new parents.
Yeah.
I think aging in place is interesting, but there is the paradox that most people who are older, they don't want to be monitored. And this feels very invasive from a privacy perspective. So
totally.
that.
Yeah. Well, the aging conundrum is also a social conundrum. It's absolutely not a technological one. And I think that companies, for example, voice assistants, I would love to see them take more of a leap of faith in actually supporting families who have complex needs. I don't really see why a home assistant with any voice functionality wouldn't also enable someone who falls in their home to call out for help and for the service to be called through that voice assistant. That should be something that companies do want to take on. It might be done through some more open source voice assistants and might be something that's already come out, but I just haven't heard about it. And I think that social care piece is not necessarily going to be resolved by something you can buy, but it is definitely going to be something like the Goodnight Lamp in part does that trick, which is to make people more at ease about connecting. But there ought to be other things, and there ought to be other ways in which someone can actually connect to their neighbors, connect to their community, connect to their city, because most older people are living alone, and that's the problem. So all the effort that we put into convincing people to buy more soap or soap more consistently, I think we ought to think about how we get people to socialize more.
I like it. And talking about people, you have an interesting point about power dynamics and how in the home we've had a history, if you're super rich or, well off, that you had servants. And even now we're replicating that dynamic with our digital assistants. I mean, heck, they're called assistants. You tell them what to do. And your point seemed to be that we shouldn't be developing tools that replicate that dynamic.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting and very dangerous dynamic to constantly think of technology services in the home space as being some kind of subservient entity. The fact that most assistants, it's now changing, thank God, but most assistants were, women's names. Now, I saw this yesterday. If a smoke alarm sounds like a woman, it's more likely to, or sounds like someone's mother, it's more likely to wake up the kids. There's this constant sort of fear, I think, of dealing with automation in the home space in a way that moves away from this idea of servitude. Most people, if they have maids or cleaners who come in once a week or so, they will usually clean before the maid comes in because they sort of feel so guilty about using someone else for their home needs. And part of this is because we live in, especially in North America, we live in homes that are enormous compared to the space that we used to have 100 years ago. But we still have these tasks that we feel need to be done at a pace that is incredible. We have basically removed most germs from our children's environments to the point where now we're actively encouraging parents to make sure that their kids eat dirt somewhere because otherwise their immune system doesn't develop. So we've sort of overdone it on the home side, I think. And I think this idea of having someone help you do that is something that we probably should shift in terms of language and in terms of application. Maybe you can have a friend who does something with you, and that's a completely different power dynamic than having an assistant. And it's also a completely different dynamic than having someone come into your home and help you do something. Help is help, and it's not necessarily subservient. A friend can help you, your parents can help you do something. But somehow the language that we use commercially is still very tied to this idea of service and servitude. If you compare it to 100 years ago, well, yes, people had maids and live-in cooks, but they also cared for them and they were paid, they were housed, they were fed.
Well, and we
don't even really do that now.
Unless you were super rich, you actually usually work together with them. So you might
exactly.
So there is kind of a shared work dynamic as well. Unless it's a Downton Abbey upstairs, downstairs situation, which was pretty rare. Reserved for a few.
It was the elite, and they actually were the ones who really didn't understand new technologies because electricity meant, or especially plumbing meant, that you wouldn't necessarily have a servant bring water up to your bath that they had just plumped in the middle of the living room. And they just didn't get the point of, having a bathroom, which would have a completely different facility which you could just operate yourself. They're like, this is a downsizing of what I have now. So they're not necessarily the best people to look to for inspiration.
Got it. Okay. Well, the book is available in the US on Amazon. It's called Smarter Homes, How Technology Will Change Your Home Life. And it's also available in the UK from the apress.com website. And it's £20 if you're in the UK, and it's about $30 for the digital version in the US. Alexandra, thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
Thank you for having me, Stacey. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at staceyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.